Look at some of the big issues in sports. We've got a special cap for our Ivy League grad over here. Darnell, bring on the cap. Dean, I'm sorry you have to go through this.
Thank you, Dean. Where'd you graduate from, Dean?
Hofstra University.
Hofstra University.
The Ivy League of Long Island, New York.
Long Island.
All right.
Long Island.
Let's move to the NFL, where we saw some incredible finishes yesterday, including overtime games between the Ravens and the Chiefs and the Eagles and the Cowboys. But both of those games were marred by some terrible officiating. In Kansas City, Michael Crabtree was called for a phantom offensive pass interference that killed a second-half drive. And in Dallas, Eagles tight end Dallas Goedert had a touchdown wiped out by one of the worst offensive pass interference calls that I've probably ever seen. The game actually started with a botched call on the opening kickoff. Dallas fumbled, but the refs ruled initially that it wasn't a fumble, then it was a fumble, and then somehow with three Eagles guys on top of the ball and one Eagles guy pulling the ball out.
That was a pretty terrible call, to be honest. I mean, they reviewed it, and the explanation I got was that it wasn't a clear recovery, although Kamu had the ball in his hand, and there was only, Eagles defenders on the ball in the replay. So whoever's watching that in New York should stay off the bottom. Common sense, you saw Kamu come out with the ball, so I don't know. Obviously, they don't pay me to make calls like that, but I was, in hindsight, obviously a big play in the game.
All right, so the question today is, should the NFL be concerned about its officiating? And this is what I've said probably the last 5 years, I know at least. There are too many judgment calls on the backs of officials. And so once they have all these judgment calls and they have to think and there's so many critical decisions to be made, it breeds incompetence. You put too much of a burden on people and you expose them in ways, you make their competence incompetent. And I just think in some kind of way, I think it was Romo and them that were talking about it this weekend, the punt return. And it seems like 25% of them are marred by flags.
Yes.
And so to me, I'm just like, hey, well, let's quit calling holding. Let's let guys hold, because I'm tired of seeing that called on punt returns. I'm tired of watching any of these damn plays where I'm like, I'm looking for that yellow flag sign more than I am following what's happening on the screen. I just think there's too much pressure on officials, too many judgment calls, and it breeds incompetence and bad calls.
Well, in that respect, you're digesting the entertainment value of the game more so than the integrity of the game that needs to be promoted. So call holding, in my eyes, every single time you see a glaring hold, because if I'm out there, I don't want that guy to be playing on a lopsided.
No, I want to be clear.
Oh, okay.
I think they should legalize holding on certain plays. I really think they should legalize holding for offensive linemen.
They have, but they just didn't say that.
But really, we need less holding. That Troy Aikman was talking about this last week about, they've emphasized to the refs to call more holding. Really? That's what they think we want? I don't want it.
Well, it's an impossible job. I applaud the referees. Overall, I think they do an amazing job based on circumstances. They're imperfect beings seeing objects move north of 20 miles an hour, a lot of times shielded from that field of view, impossible to duplicate and impossible to really prepare for, and still make 9 out of 10 calls correctly. Every time I've been out on the field, there have been times where I'm like, woo, that was a bad call. But then there's also been times like, how did he see that? Like, that offensive lineman had me clutched to the point I couldn't even get his hands off me. But you saw that from 30 yards away. So all things considered, I love what the referees are doing, the officials are doing. However, I do have a problem with the review system. As a check and balance system, if you're going to say, hey, we're going to go to technology to improve this process, that's when I think it needs to be foolproof. I hate when it goes to New Jersey and someone's sitting there in an air-conditioned room and has 28 screens up and still gets that play wrong on the review. That's when I throw a flag at the official.
Well, I think, and it goes to New York, not New Jersey. We don't say anything back to Jersey. But here's the thing, two things. The expectation on officials is perfection. Right? No one else is perfect. No one else is expected to be perfect, but the expectation is perfection. And we know they're human beings. They're not going to be perfect. I agree with you, Marcellus, that when it goes to review, now that bar is higher because we have technology. We have the ability to slow things down. We should make less mistakes in replay. But the thing is, there's always going to be mistakes in officiating in real time. Again, they're human beings, But when it goes to review, we got to get those 99% of the time, if not 100. And I think that's where we're seeing, and to your initial point, we threw too much stuff at the officials this year. I remember in 2015, I was at the league office and we were going through a couple of week stretch of some tough times. And Bill Parcells just called me out of the blue. And he said, one of the things that I talked to my team about is you reduce the variables, you improve performance. We threw too much stuff at the officials this year. Helmet rule, offensive pass interference, holding, all of these things. And now it's harder and harder to be consistent. And I think that's, if we reduce the variables, we'll improve their performance.
What about the fans that's concerned? And I'm one of them as well. When I'm like, how do you rationalize the fact that this did go back to New York? This is now a part of a process where it should be a higher bar, higher expectation, better result, but we still come back with the review and it's still wrong in comparison to what the eye test is showing us.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that, the play that Malcolm Jenkins was talking about, the rule says you have to have a clear recovery, right? You have to physically see the player recover the ball, but there has to be some common sense too. If you've got 4 Eagles players on top of the football and there's no Cowboy player and the Eagles come out with it, then we got to give the ball to the Eagles. And I think that's where it's technology, it's judgment, and it's common sense. And if we can create that right balance of those 3 things, then I think we'll be in a better place.
You heard my variable that I want eliminated, holding.
Yeah.
What would be your suggestion? You don't have to react to mine.
Sure.
What variables can be taken away?
Holding is the most subjective call that they have. And you always hear what you could call holding on every play. Well, that's not necessarily true, but so much, and Marcellus, you know this from playing, so much of offensive line play is outside the frame, right? It used to be, you remember the old tapes? They block like this. Now it's here. Okay, I can be here, but do I restrict you? Are my feet beat? Am I restricting you from getting to the ball carrier? There's so many variables to calling holding. Is it at the point of attack? Is it on the backside of the play? I think, again, you have to call holding when it's there. You can't just liberalize it to the point where we're just letting offensive players tackle defensive players.
No, I didn't say tackle.
But I do think the ticky-tack ones we can let go. Get the big ones, just like any other area of the game. And again, I think we'll be better
Dean,
off.
I don't think it through because it's an original idea. I'm talking. We want to protect the quarterback.
Absolutely.
Let the offensive lineman hold.
What?
Seriously?
No, but he's on. You're on to something, Jace, because you look at these new leagues that are starting up. The gap between the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman from an athleticism, it's become greater.
Yeah.
And so if you want to promote offense, you let the offensive lineman get away with a little bit of holding, protect the quarterback for that split second longer. Now, instead of a sack, and I know you don't want to hear this as a former defensive guy, he gets that pass away. Now we have more offense. So there's something there.
And it helps the running game. And I'm telling you, running backs, people used to love to see running backs do what Barry Sanders and Walter Payton did. If you want more offense, there's better ways to do it than just illegalizing hitting. When a defensive line, Randy Gregory grabbed the leg of a quarterback yesterday and sacked him, and they called him for roughing the passer. You can't have that. Upsets hardcore football people.
And that's not a foul. I mean, that was not a foul.
Yes.
He got his body off to the side. He used the arms to wrap. That was just a missed call. And again, you want to see a forcible blow to the knee area or below for it to be a foul.
Amazing that Whitlock is having the Al Bundy moment up here to try to get into the NFL again, because I got hold. Forget this broadcasting. And you over here supporting this.
I still got to get in the 3.
I'm saying it has merit. I'm not saying we need to go there yet, but the argument
Any
does
other
have
variables
some merit.
that, again, what does Parcells think? Or,
I just think you can't change 15 rules every offseason. Yeah. The rule book, and I think what we've seen in the past is changing rules to accommodate one play that happens maybe every 10 years. And because that's not a perfectly equitable result. Well, we've got to take a big picture approach to this, right? Does it happen once every 10 years, or is this something we're seeing week in and week out? So the game is in good shape. Why are we changing 13, 14 rules a year? Now the officials have to relearn that, re-educate themselves, re-educate the players and the coaches. Look at the big picture. Maybe there's a rule here or there that we can tweak, but let's not change a bunch of rules every year and everybody has to start from page 1 every season.
And so my defense of officiating would be 20 years ago, it was a lot easier. There were less things to think about.
Absolutely. And you look at, and remember, we think there's too many fouls today. Historically, for the last 40 years, fouls have been around 16 fouls a game, and that's where it is this year. Think about 40 years ago, how many less fouls there were. Think about, there weren't defenseless player rules. There wasn't illegal contact, all of these things that we've added. So if they've done a good job in terms of calling the number of fouls and keeping that consistent. But again, it goes back to, we see 4 or 5 plays a weekend, and there are thousands of plays every weekend, and we're going to focus on that negative.
Thank you, Dean. Coming up
Thank you.
was last night.